How you doing? Doing English 12 here. Doing a short story called The Keeper and Me by Richard Wagamese. Excerpt 1, Disappearance. About the 60s scoop. In this first section, we learn how Garnet Raven, the protagonist of the novel, is scooped from his family. So he's a Ojibwe. So let's go. 3, I disappeared into foster homes and never made it back until I was 25. I'm 30 now, been here 5 years, but it feels longer. So much has happened. So when I was born, my family still lived the old way. There was a small clan of ravens that lived across Shotgun Bay in a few canvas army tents and what was my grandpa's trap line. My mom, pa, 2 brothers and sister all lived together with my grandparents and a few aunts, uncles, and cousins. We trapped, hunted, and fished and pretty much lived off the land like our people have for centuries, and according to everyone, we were a pretty happy clan. The first words I spoke were Ojibwe words, and the first sounds I heard when I was born were the sound of the wind in the trees, water, and the gentle murmur of Ojibwe voices all around me. According to Ma, they got an idea I was going to be one of the wandering kind real early. I guess I was a rambunctious little kid and got to crawling around real good. In fact, I got so good at that, I'd crawl right on out of the tent and be heading off towards the woods to look for my pa and grandpa when my ma and granny have to charge out and put the scoop on me. Guess it happened so many times that my granny finally got tired of chasing me around and made me little harness out of moose hide, which they tied to a tree with about 10-foot lead for me to crawl around on. Kept me out of trouble, but I disappeared anyway. What happened was a couple guys from the Ontario Hydro showed up one day with a big sheaf of papers, and they told me my family were planning on building a big dam downriver and that the reservoir behind it would be flooding right back over our traditional trap line. Even though the ravens had trapped that area for generations, no one had ever told them anything about ownership or title. It was outside the reserve lands that were ours by treaty and was actually owned by the hydro company, so my family had to move, and since there was no work or even houses available on White Dog at the time, their only choice was to head for Manaki, the nearest town. And according to Ma, learning to live by the clock sure was a hell of a lot tougher than living by the sun and the seasons the way they'd been used to. Finding work was tough. You got to understand that Northern Ontario around the middle 1950s was pretty uptight racist community, and Ojibwes weren't exactly the toast of the towns then. So Ma and Pa spent lots of time away from the small shack we lived in at the edge of town, and we kids were left in the care of our granny, who would have been about 65 then. Now, Indians got a whole different way of looking at things like family. When you're a kid around here, everyone's always picking you up, feeding you, and generally taking care of you. Sociologists call it the extended family concept. When you're born, you got a whole built-in family consisting of everyone around, so it was natural my parents' eyes to leave us with the old lady while they were out trying to make a living. But the Ontario Children's Aid Society had a different set of eyes, and all they seen was a bunch of rowdy little Indian kids terrorizing a bent-up old lady. Now, anybody who knows anything about Indians knows that if there was any terrorizing being done at all, it was being done by the old lady. We were being raised just fine, but it wasn't long before they showed up with a plan for all of us. According to my sister Jane, who's the oldest of us and the one who remembers the most from those days, they showed up one afternoon, a young woman and an older white-haired man. They pulled up while we kids were playing tag and swinging from old tire hung from a tree in the front yard. My granny was out back doing something or another. Anyway, they called us over to this big green station wagon and handed out chocolates all around. Well, for some wild little bush Indians raised on bannock and beaver, chocolate was pretty close to heaven. So when they offered us more if we hopped into the car, well, we all piled in. We wound up in the group home on a farm outside of Kenora, that's in Ontario, northern Ontario, in the custody of Children's Aid. About a year later, I was taken away from my brothers and sisters and put in another home by myself. Jane tells us it's like this. See, the foster home we had on that farm had about 6 other kids in their care. We all stayed in a kind of dormitory on the 3rd floor of their farmhouse in bunk beds, and we had to help out with the work around the farm too. Anyway, these people didn't exactly go out of their way to show us any kind of real welcome. At Christmas time, while their kids were whooping it up in the living room, the foster kids made to sit at a long table on the porch. There weren't any gifts for us either, but my brothers and sisters had somehow managed to scrape up a little cash and bought me a toy truck for Christmas. They wrapped it up in plain brown paper and put it beside my pillow so I'd find it come Christmas morning. It was just a little toy truck, nothing like the big Tonka trucks kids get these days that they can ride around. Just a little blue and red truck with one wheel missing. Well, according to Jane, I loved that little truck. I slept with it and carried it with me wherever I went. It never seemed to matter that it had one wheel missing. I'd be plowing roads, chasing bad guys, and building cities all over the yard with that little truck. Well, one morning I was sitting in the sandbox playing with my truck when the school bus came to pick up the other kids. I guess my brother and sister had been told the night before that I was getting sent away, and Jane said they all figured it was better to just let it happen rather than let me know about it. So I'm out there playing that morning, and Jane came and grabbed me up in a big warm hug and just held for a long, long time. I guess I got a little irritated and pushed her away finally and got back to my play. Jan, geez, well, all I said, she says those were the last words she heard and the last sight she had of me for 20 years was from the back window of that school bus, a little Ojibwe boy all hunched over in the sandbox with a little red truck with one wheel missing, growing smaller and smaller, till it looked like the land just swallowed me up. When she got home that night, the sandbox was empty except for that little blue and red truck, the wind already busy burying it in the sand. When we met again 20 years later, she grabbed me in that same big warm hug and just held on for a long, long time. Wow.